obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens. Before we jump into today's episode with Clyde Wilson and myself, Krista Olien, I wanted to add a little bit of background to a concept we discuss in detail. Moore's Law is the observation that the number of transistors on an integrated circuit will double every 2 years with minimal rise in cost. Intel's co-founder, Gordon Moore, presented this theory in 1965. The Parking Network uses the idea of Moore's Law as a metaphor for the development cycle of a product. Nothing ever enters the market as the final product. Important things like cell phones, computers, EVs, and e-commerce all start as something and go through a development process over 30 or more years to get to their mature version. Most times, the mature version looks nothing and acts nothing like the original form. For our purposes, the concept of Moore's Law refers to the development process and the constant refining of a product until it reaches its widely accepted and mature form. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Our Parking Industry podcast. We are here today and we're going to be talking about electric vehicles. Quite the conversation in today's world, also known as EVs, electric vehicles. There's also a hybrid version that we're going to get into a little bit today. So we look forward to chatting. So Clyde, can you give us a little intro about what we're going to talk about today?
Well, we, as the Parking Network and in our industry, our parking industry podcast, we had decided to start picking the 6 topics that we see as the most important that the people in the field running parking operations are having to deal with. EVs was one of those, so we decided to do this one first and start taking a look at and having the ability to discuss the EV situation and where we are now. This is a very precarious position that we're in right now. There's a lot of people talking about it. And so we felt like we've done a tremendous amount of research. We have certainly not done everything we can, but on the EV process, as well as the other 5 topics that we've chosen, we have we could talk about EVs or any one of these other topics all day long. So they're divided up into sections. So this is going to be kind of a global discussion of where we are now with EVs. We're not going to go into the detail as much as I would like to. We're not going to go into the detail of software. I was asked a question the other day about software, and I kind of knew the answer to it because about 6 weeks before the question was asked, I had read that one of the charging developers had solved this problem, but we haven't seen it. It's not out there. And I don't feel like as a consulting company, we can answer that something, especially in this EV world right now, we can answer something until we've had the ability to touch it or somebody that we trust touch it to be sure it's really available. So I was afraid to answer the question. So we're going to stay away from the technology discussions. We're going to stay away from a lot of the detailed development discussions. And we're going to just talk about what our clients are having to deal with every day when they're getting asked about, what are you going to do about EVs? All right. So that's kind of where we are and where we're going to go with this.
So why would a parking garage or a parking facility want to be in the charging business? So historically, we have never been in the car fueling business. There's been other amenities in parking garages, but not a gas station per se. So why would we want to be in the charging business, essentially fueling electric vehicles?
Well, this kind of happened several different ways. And one of the ways, of course, well, I'll wait for that one for just a second. One of the ways is we were coming out of COVID. The revenues in all the garages had gone down. Everybody's the parking operators are trying to look at what new ways can we develop revenue to help our clients out. They saw EVs parking in the garage as one of those ways. Then there was a development issue that was happening. And nobody was really thinking about the fact that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, today, we're still in the early adapter phase of EVs. The people that are buying EVs today are not the normal everyday people driving to work every day. The people that are buying EVs today are the people who fall into that category of early adopters. And this is something that's intriguing to them. And they get to say they're saving the planet, and they also get to, tell all their friends, I have an electric car, I have a Tesla. But the reality is, we've always, in everything we've ever done development wise, we need those people very, very badly, because they're the ones that go out there and test things. And then we find out whether something works, whether it's appealing, not appealing, and it either goes through a development process or not. So the early adapters are buying them. The parking operators are trying to figure out how to make more revenue, and they see that as an opportunity. But everybody kind of forgets. So everybody says, well, we're the garage. Why can't the cars just, they're driving to the garage and going to park all day? Because of the long charging times of the vehicles today when they're in a level 2 charger, because of the long charging times, it sounds like, well, that's the most appropriate place to put them. We'll just put all these EV stations in, and they can plug up while they're sitting at work all day. Well, we're in the development phase. That will go away. The charging time will continuously drop over the next 10 years. The next 3 or 4 years, it'll drop. It's already dropped. I've had 2 EVs. The charging time went from, at a level 2 charger for one of those cars, went from 15 miles per hour of charging to 30 something miles per hour charging. And if you have a level 3 charger now for a Tesla, you're getting over 150 miles in about 30 minutes. So the charging times comes down. That's going to continue to happen. So all these EV chargers that we're being requested to put in are really not going to have a need for those. So everybody's into it because it was a way to make more money, to charge people for parking in the garage. It also costs a lot to put in EV charging stations and to get the power into them. So that's kind of my the answer right now. Where we are in an industry of, we've been through this push to put in EV charging stations. The reality is, we're not probably ever going to need those, and we are not in the parking business going to really be in a position, or should not be in a position to be the gas stations of the future. As soon as these charging times go down, the gas stations are coming. They'll jump right into this business, and it'll be 5 minutes. The development is already underway, and there's a few pretty major hurdles to cross to move charging stations charging times down to 5 minutes. That part of the biggest one of the problems associated with that is the cables that are carrying the power from the charging station to the car get too hot when you start upping the amount of time or the amount of energy coming through to quickly charge a car. There's a lot of development going on now to be able to put charging cables in that are able to reduce the heat and not get so hot. So that time is going to come down. We're just in this early adapter phase. So
And when you're talking about early adapter phase and the development phase in general, you're really referring to something we discuss a lot on our end, which is Moore's Law. So can you define Moore's Law a little bit more?
well, it's interesting. Yeah, I love that because I've picked up Moore's Law now and moved it over to everything we do. Uh, but Moore's Law was really developed in the 60s, to discuss the ability to put more information on a chip. And it started growing, and the theory was that it would double every 2 years. But that was taking us from pre-laptop computer days up through that period of time. And so Moore's Law impacted. So you can imagine, if you double something every 2 years and you go through 40 years of that, now 50, 60 years of that. Well, now we're up to where I have a device laying over here. I won't grab it. Oh, I don't have it right here. A thumb drive. That's 1 terabyte of data. 1 terabyte. Just a few years ago, to buy a terabyte storage drive, it was about the size of a shoebox almost. And now it's here. So that's Moore's law. And so the same thing happens in Moore's law is what I just described, but I look at it as a development phase. So the development phase is something starts up here. I got to get my hands on the screen here. Something starts up here in the development phase, and then the Moore's law, and in our case of EVs, the technicians that are developing the charging stations, that are developing the batteries, that are developing all of the electric motors, and all of this stuff are moving every year. They're constantly refining and refining. So it's the Moore's law of EVs, or of this type of development. Same thing is happening in e-commerce, and the same thing is happening in everything that we do. So this development phase starts. The Moore's law of the development phase keeps hitting this. Well, right now it's up here. It still has to go way down to the bottom of the upside down V till we get to the point where we actually have the EVs that we always envisioned that they would be. Or, I shouldn't say EVs, that we actually have the car and the transportation type that we dreamed of or want to solve all the problems we're trying to solve. Because by the time you get from here to the bottom of that upside down V, there's a very high likelihood that the ability to move us will have totally changed. This is a 30-year process. It may actually go as far as 50 years. We've certainly seen that with other things. The place that I like to use to describe that was ATM machines. ATM machines came out in the 70s. I got my first ATM card when I came home from the military in 1974. All the ATM card was designed to do was to let me go to a machine and get money instead of having to go to the bank. And so for all of you out there that are way too young for this, in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, if you wanted money, so if you had a hot date on Friday night and you wanted to be able to pay for dinner, you had to make sure you made it to the bank before 3 o'clock, or you didn't have cash. And we didn't have credit cards. And nobody used credit cards to pay for a meal in 1960s and 70s. So the ATM card was designed to move us where we could get cash without having to beat it to the bank on Friday afternoon and stand in line to try to cash a check. So what happens is now we're down to, I still have an ATM card, but it's really like a credit card, except it goes directly to my bank. But what it did was it had the reverse effect. Instead of giving us more access to cash, it actually gave us more access to being able to use a credit card, because the amount of the purchases went down to where now you can, people will charge $2 or $3 on their card, instead of where in the 60s and 70s, when ATM cards were developed, instead of that minimum purchase being $100 or $200, you would never put anything on a credit card less than a couple $100. Well, today you'll charge $2. So the ATM card, starting out as having access to cash, really helped us move through where we are today as we move into a cashless society. So I'm not concerned. I'm a big believer that as we move through this development phase, and the Moore's law people of the EV world keep doing their magic, we may end up with something totally different in the next 20 years. So that's my
Yeah.
very well educated guess on where this is all going.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So the debit card, essentially the ATM card, started out as an easier access to cash. And what it's really done through that funnel process of Moore's law is it's
Right.
eliminated cash in our society.
It
So
has.
the initial concept of it kind of got reversed through that development process. That's so interesting.
It is. It's terribly interesting, and you've heard this presentation. You've been a part of this presentation about cell phones, where they started at one place, and now they're and now my cell phone. we started with the cell phone development over here. It was a big, huge thing that could only make a phone call. It was the only thing, couldn't even store your data. And over here, Bill Gates was working on computers. And in 1990, when cell phones were being developed, Bill Gates was sitting over here with dual floppy disks, and he knew that wasn't going anywhere. So the two of those are Moore's lawing it to death. But what they're really doing is they're moving closer to each other through time. So from 1990 to about 2015 to really about 2020, we moved to everybody has a smartphone that really can do my phone work, but it can also do everything Bill Gates could do with the big dual floppy disk. Because on this cell phone, since Krista moved us over to Microsoft 365 and all of our data is now out there in the world, I can do literally everything that we do with the parking network. I can really do it on my cell phone if I wanted to carry around a screen and a mouse with me and everything to be able to do it, because it's too small for me to do. But that's the development phase. So what's happened with EVs is we're up here in the development phase and everybody thinks we're at the end. And we're not. We're at the beginning. We're at the very, very beginning. So everybody's out trying to buy EV charging stations, and we're just not ready for this yet.
And one of the interesting things that I've seen, kind of going back to the whole "are we a gas station" idea, is there are salespeople for those EV charging companies that are going out to these facilities, and they're offering deals to put in chargers, whereas I don't see any gas stations. Like Shell isn't going out and saying, hey, can we put a gas station inside of your parking garage? So
Right.
there's a sales side to it too that the gas industry doesn't necessarily have. So I think that's affecting it. Another piece you were talking about was the cables and the ability. So right now, with the level of chargers that we have, those smaller cables that are already in electrical things that are already in facilities, they're just tapping into those. They may have to upgrade them a little bit, but it's a resource that's already there. Whereas like gas tanks and gas lines are like a huge, they're a huge thing you would have to put in to actually have a filling station inside of a garage. So the hurdles are different and the approach has been different as far as getting that industry into our industry. So who is charging? Who is using the electric vehicle EV chargers inside of the parking facilities?
Boy, that's a great question. I was just in I was with 2 weeks ago in Los Angeles with John Van Horn, and we were going to lunch. And so we parked in it's right by the airport, a very large Marriott. Was it a Marriott? I don't remember now. Hotel that has a very popular restaurant for lunch, and we've been there a few times. And it has a very large garage. There are a lot of people that park in there. And we pulled in, and of course, the first spaces that we saw were the line of 14 EV charging stations. And half of those spaces were empty. And so John said, we should just park here. And I said, well, we can't. They're EV charging stations. I'm not going to be the one that breaks that rule, right? So we're not going to do that. Go up there. So we drove on up and parked and then walked back down. Well, of the 14 charging stations, I'm not sure that there were actually half. There were 4 or 5 that were empty. There were 2 cars there that were charging. Both of those were plug-in hybrids. I don't know how long they had been there, but they only take about, maybe 25 to 30 miles of charging. So at most, they're only going to charge for an hour or so. The rest of the cars that were there, and I got a picture of them, the rest of the cars were there were a few Teslas who were sitting there, and they hadn't even plugged their car in. They weren't even pretending that they were charging. And then there were a few other cars that were there that were also not even pretending. They weren't plugged in. And there were a couple of cars that were actually plugged in, but according to the charger, I could tell that they weren't charging. So the car was full. So just brings in the whole problem as we put parking in our garages, we then have to manage this stuff. So who's parking there today? Well, the full plug-in hybrids today, as a rule, get about 240 miles when their batteries are fully charged. And right now, the one statistic that we seem to know very well is that 80% of those full EV cars have a charging station at home. So if you have a 240-mile gas tank and you're driving, the average person drives 12 miles each direction to work, so that's only 24 round trip. You don't need to plug in when you go to the garage. So, and what's going to happen, this is coming within the next 2 or 3 years. It's already happening, I'm sure. Somebody's doing this. You can't just give this away for free. It is a parking space. The charging costs money to put in the charging, to build all the infrastructure for this. And then as we start having to manage those 14 spaces that had a bunch of cars in them that weren't charging, the parking people get into it. So now you're hiring more people, you're taking time away from managing your garage, or you're hiring more people. So the cost goes up. So the cost of charging at work is going to be an awful lot more than the cost of plugging in your garage at night when you get home. So that's a strong incentive for people to not charge at work. The other strong incentive is going to be when we start managing these things that we're not doing right now, except in a few cases. I've certainly talked to some building owners out there who think they're doing, and from what I've heard from them, are really working hard at doing a good job of managing these. So they've really cut down or eliminated the people that are parking in these spaces that are just taking up space and not really charging their car. So the thought, everything that I've read in the last month is that the full EV, as the development phase goes down, the charging time goes down, the batteries get bigger, so they're able to get up to the average, the average car out there today, especially the average SUV, gets about 400 plus miles up in their gas tank when they're full. Well, the EVs are going to get there pretty soon, so they'll be able to do the same thing. So, and with 80% of them charging at home, they'll charge at home. The few that are not able to charge at home or that are on trips will charge while they're out on the road. They're not going to go to the office building that they work in after coming home from a 6-hour drive. They're not going to go there to plug in to charge. They're just going to go home, or the gas stations are going to catch up. But believe me, you asked a great question earlier about the gas stations. The gas stations are not going to be left out of this. There's some funny statistics about gas stations, and if you look at a gas station today, a gas station is much more than a gas station. It's a quick stop, so there's food in there. So actually, only about 40-something% of the people who pull into a 7-Eleven actually get gas. The other 50-something% go inside and buy something that they needed to pick up before they went home, before they went to work, or to snack on while they're driving.
Or with 2 young children, you end up inside and you buy something and you have to get gas.
Right. Right. So, well, there's a statistic on that. 38% of the people who buy gas also go into the store.
Mm-hmm.
It only takes about 6 minutes to fuel your tank if that's all you're doing. But once you go into the store, it takes 15 plus minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So with a Tesla now and a fast charging station, you can, and I've done this with a Tesla, you can put in, almost top it off, get it up to 70 or 80% in about 20 minutes. So the only thing that's happening with the gas stations right now is that they understand the development process and they understand this is all changing. And so they're not out there throwing in EV charging stations and wasting a lot of money until we get through the early adopter phase and they kind of know what their role in this whole thing is going to be. So that's all going to watch and change too. We've got a 20-year process of being able to sit back and watch this whole development happen and wonder what it's going to be like when it gets to 25 to 30 years from now. It's going to be interesting. But
Absolutely.
now we have another problem that's coming along that may change everything even more. In all of this discussion about hybrids or about EVs, we've kind of not looked at the EV hybrids. So the plug-in hybrids, which is a plug-in, and I just looked at it. There are like 40 something different models for sale, covering all of the different manufacturers right now. And they are a vehicle that has a small battery that you plug in and charge that gets anywhere from 11. The most common ones were in the 20s, 25, 26, 27, some in the 30s, mid 30s, and some even reaching 40 miles in their batteries. So the battery's used to drive to the end of that. And then the engine takes over and drives you, so you don't have range anxiety, because it doesn't matter if you run out of battery, you've got a car engine that's going to start up and run and take off. But there's the interesting issue with that. There are really two pieces to this. The interesting issue with that is they only get, on average, about 25 to 30 miles of the current battery that they have today. The average person drives 12 miles each way to work. So you're not going to probably make it home. And if you're trying to live completely off of your battery, you are going to want to charge at work. But the charging time is going to come down. So you're only going to need to charge about 30 minutes. So what are you going to do? Are you going to plug in and charge and sit there and wait for your car to charge? Are we going to develop a gas station place to buy all the stuff that we want to buy sitting in the parking garage, because we've got people sitting there for 30 minutes charging their car because they don't want to go up to their office and then have to come back? So it's just so funny that we're in this wonderful development phase that we're getting to witness firsthand. That's kind of the challenges. So the plug-in hybrids, there's also another issue with plug-in hybrids. They've had a technical problem in really getting them to do what they want them to do. The motor companies have. They're really not out of that yet. They're really not through that hurdle of trying to figure out what's causing some of the problems that they're having with them. But let me tell you, as soon as they get through this problem, they're going to have those develop. The batteries are going to get smaller. They're not going to be 25 miles average per car. They're going to be up in the 50 to 75, and some even with 100 miles in them, which then eliminates their need to charge at work. So it's just that whole funny thing of development phase. And it's great that we in the parking business have been able to respond a little bit by putting in charging stations. But at the same time, our message to our clients is we have to be very cautious, because this is in that development cycle and we're still way up here. And the other thing that you've heard me talk about 100 times is, as soon as the government got in to this, we're still way up here. Now all of the people working on the EV version of Moore's Law, trying to get us down to the bottom of that curve, are stuck up here trying to satisfy the government requirements that have nothing to do with the end of this 30-year cycle. So we're getting this whole process delayed a little bit. I've done as much research on this as I can right now that it looks to me like the big motor companies are realizing that there's something wrong over here and that this may not be exactly where we're going. So I fully believe, and you can see in what they're doing, they're paralleling this development process with where they think this is headed, so that they're prepared for it in case this side over here never gets out of the early adopter phase. To get out of the early adopter phase is going to be really, really difficult. And we just went through the bad winter of 2022, not quite as bad a winter in 2023, except in some parts of the country. And what we did was we learned we have a whole list of problems. We have the charging time problem. That's going to get resolved. But we have EV cars, and all of a sudden, the early adopters that live up north realized my EV may not get me to work today, because it's 20 below outside and the battery's not going to be able to get me there. We've also been through, we've got several other development issues like charging stations. So what did we find out last year? We found out that 46% of the charging stations out there don't work. So nobody's maintaining them. These were all bought from somewhere else, brought here and installed. Nobody thought through the process. One of the biggest charging companies out there that has really disappointed me, and I won't say who they are, put in the largest number of charging stations all over the country. They've not contracted with anybody locally to make sure they're maintained. So they're waiting on a call from some poor person who's out of battery that says none of your charging stations work to decide, well, we may need to get somebody over there to fix these. I was one of those. So I remember that one well.
Yeah.
I ended up finally getting to a charging station that worked, and I had barely 1 mile left.
Yeah.
And if that one hadn't worked, I was calling Uber. I was stuck.
We know that EVs are a big conversation. So as a part of this conversation, we're going to have multiple episodes about electric vehicles, EVs, hybrids, the benefits, the drawbacks, all things EV. So coming up soon, we do have an interview with an expert in the field who has done mountains of research about electrical vehicles. His name is Dale Denda, so be looking out for that. And then we will carry on other conversations about electrical vehicles in the future, and we hope you listen. See you next time. To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on our Parking Industry Podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.